Section 49 of the Dream of the Red Chamber, Book One. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Buchanan. The Dream of the Red Chamber, Book One, by Cao Xueqin. Translated by Henry Bencraft Joly. Chapter 21, Part 1. The eminent Hsi Jen, with winsome ways, rails at Pao-yü with a view to exhortation. The beauteous P'ing Erh, with soft words, screens Chia Lian. But to resume our story. When Shi Xiangyun ran out of the room, she was all in a flutter lest Lin Tai-yü should catch her up; but Pao-yü, who came after her, readily shouted out: "You'll trip and fall! How ever could she come up to you?" Lin Tai-yü went in pursuit of her as far as the entrance, when she was impeded from making further progress by Pao-yü, who stretched his arms out against the posts of the door. "Were I to spare Yün Erh, I couldn't live!" Lin Tai-yü exclaimed, as she tugged at his arms. But Hsiang-yün, perceiving that Pao-yü obstructed the door, and surmising that Tai-yü could not come out, speedily stood still. "My dear cousin," she smilingly pleaded, "do let me off this time." But it just happened that Pao-ch'ai, who was coming along, was at the back of Hsiang-yün, and with a face also beaming with smiles. "I advise you both," she said, "to leave off out of respect for cousin Pao-yü, and have done." "I don't agree to that," Tai-yü rejoined. "Are you people, pray, all of one mind to do nothing but make fun of me?" "Who ventures to make fun of you?" Pao-yü observed advisingly. "And hadn't you made sport of her, would she have presumed to have said anything about you?" While this quartet were finding it an arduous task to understand one another, a servant came to invite them to have their repast, and they eventually crossed over to the front side; and as it was already time for the lamps to be lit, madame Wang, widow Li Wan, lady Feng, Ying Ch'un, Tan Ch'un, Hsi Ch'un, and the other cousins, adjourned in a body to dowager lady Chia's apartments on this side, where the whole company spent a while in a chat on irrelevant topics; after which they each returned to their rooms and retired to bed. Hsiang-yün, as of old, betook herself to Tai-yü's quarters to rest, and Pao-yü escorted them both into their apartment; and it was after the hour had already passed the second watch, and Hsi Jen had come and pressed him several times, that he at length returned to his own bedroom and went to sleep. The next morning, as soon as it was daylight, he threw his clothes over him, put on his low shoes, and came over into Tai-yü's room, where he however saw nothing of the two girls Su Ch'uan and Sui Lü, as there was no one else here and there besides his two cousins, still reclining under the coverlets. Tai-yü was closely wrapped in a quilt of almond red silk, and lying quietly with closed eyes, fast asleep; while Shi Xiang-yün, with her handful of shiny hair draggling along the edge of the pillow, was covered up only to the chest, and outside the coverlet rested her curved snow white arm, with the gold bracelets which she had on. At the sight of her, Pao-yü heaved a sigh. "Even when asleep," he soliloquised, "she can't be quiet; but by and by, when the wind will have blown her, she'll again shout that her shoulder is sore." With these words he gently covered her; but Lin Tai-yü had already awoke out of her sleep, and becoming aware that there was some one about, she promptly concluded that it must, for a certainty, be Pao-yü; and turning herself accordingly round, and discovering at a glance that the truth was not beyond her conjectures, she observed: "What have you run over to do at this early hour?" To which question Pao-yü replied: "Do you call this early? But get up and see for yourself." "First quit the room," Tai-yü suggested, "and let us get up." Pao-yü thereupon made his exit into the antechamber, and Tai-yü jumped out of bed and awoke Hsiang-yün. When both of them had put on their clothes, Pao-yü re entered and took a seat by the side of the toilet table, whence he beheld Tzu Ch'uen and Hsüeh Yen walk in and wait upon them, as they dressed their hair and performed their ablutions. Hsiang yün had done washing her face, and Cui at once took the remaining water and was about to throw it away, when Pao-yü interposed, saying: "Wait, I'll avail myself of this opportunity to wash too and finish with it, and thus save myself the trouble of having again to go over." Speaking the while, he hastily came forward, and, bending his waist, he washed his face twice with 2 handfuls of water; and when Tzu chüan went over to give him the scented soap, Pao-yü added: "In this basin there's a good deal of it, and there's no need of rubbing any more." He then washed his face with 2 more handfuls, and forthwith asked for a towel; and Cui exclaimed: "What! have you still got this failing? When will you turn a new leaf?" But Pao-yü paid not so much as any heed to her, and there and then called for some salt, with which he rubbed his teeth, and rinsed his mouth. When he had done, he perceived that Hsiang yün had already finished combing her hair, and speedily coming up to her, he put on a smile and said: "My dear cousin, comb my hair for me." "This can't be done," Hsiang yün objected. "My dear cousin," Pao-yü continued smirkingly, "how is it that you combed it for me in former times?" "I've forgotten now how to comb it," Hsiang yün replied. "I'm not, after all, going out of doors," Pao-yü observed, "nor will I wear a hat or a frontlet, so that all that need to be done is to plait it a few queues, that's all." Saying this, he went on to appeal to her in 1,001 endearing terms, so that Hsiang yün had no alternative but to draw his head nearer to her and to comb one queue after another; and as when he stayed at home he wore no hat, nor had, in fact, any tufted horns, she merely took the short surrounding hair from all 4 sides, and twisting it into small tufts, she collected it together over the hair on the crown of the head, and plaited a large queue, binding it fast with red ribbon; while from the root of the hair to the end of the queue were 4 pearls in a row, below which, in the way of a tip, was suspended a golden pendant. "Of these pearls there are only 3," Hsiang yün remarked as she went on plaiting. "This isn't one like them. I remember these were all of one kind, and how is it that there's one short?" "I've lost one," Pao-yü rejoined. "It must have dropped," Hsiang yün added, "when you went out of doors, and been picked up by some one when you were off your guard, and he's now, instead of you, the richer for it." "One can neither tell whether it has been really lost," Tai yü, who stood by, interposed, smiling the while sarcastically, "nor could one say whether it hasn't been given away to some one to be mounted in some trinket or other and worn." Pao-yü made no reply, but set to work, seeing that the 2 sides of the dressing table were all full of toilet boxes and other such articles, taking up those that came under his hand and examining them. Grasping unawares a box of cosmetic, which was within his reach, he would have liked to have brought it to his lips, but he feared again lest Hsiang yün should chide him. While he was hesitating whether to do so or not, Hsiang yün, from behind, stretched forth her arm and gave him a smack, which sent the cosmetic flying from his hand, and she cried out: "You good for nothing! When will you mend those weaknesses of yours?" But hardly had she had time to complete this remark, when she caught sight of Hsi Jen walk in, who, upon perceiving the state of things, became aware that he was already combed and washed, and she felt constrained to go back and attend to her own coiffure and ablutions. But suddenly she saw Pao-ch'ai come in and inquire: "Where's cousin Pao-yü gone?" "Do you mean to say," Hsi Jen insinuated with a sardonic smile, "that your cousin Pao-yü has leisure to stay at home?" When Pao-ch'ai heard these words, she inwardly comprehended her meaning; and when she further heard Hsi Jen remark with a sigh: "Cousins may well be on intimate terms, but they should also observe some sort of propriety, and they shouldn't night and day romp together; and no matter how people may tender advice, it's all like so much wind blowing past the ears." Pao-ch'ai began at these remarks to cogitate within her mind: "May I not, possibly, have been mistaken in my estimation of this girl? For to listen to her words, she would really seem to have a certain amount of savoir faire." Pao-ch'ai thereupon took a seat upon the stove couch, and quietly, in the course of their conversation on one thing and another, she managed to ascertain her age, her native village, and other such particulars; and then setting her mind diligently to put, on the sly, her conversation and mental capacity to the test, she discovered how deeply worthy she was to be respected and loved. But in a while Pao-yü arrived, and Pao-ch'ai at once quitted the apartment. "How is it," Pao-yü at once inquired, "that cousin Pao-ch'ai was chatting along with you so lustily, and that as soon as she saw me enter, she promptly ran away?" Hsi Jen did not make any reply to his first question, and it was only when he had repeated it that Hsi Jen remarked: "Do you ask me? How can I know what goes on between you two?" When Pao-yü heard these words, and he noticed that the look on her face was so unlike that of former days, he lost no time in putting on a smile and asking: "Why is it that you are too angry in real earnest?" "How could I presume to get angry?" Hsi Jen rejoined smiling indifferently; "but you mustn't, from this day forth, put your foot into this room; and as you have anyhow people to wait on you, you shouldn't come again to make use of my services, for I mean to go and attend to our old mistress, as in days of old." With this remark still on her lips, she lay herself down on the stove couch and closed her eyes. When Pao-yü perceived the state of mind she was in, he felt deeply surprised, and could not refrain from coming forward and trying to cheer her up. But Hsi Jen kept her eyes closed and paid no heed to him, so that Pao-yü was quite at a loss how to act. But espying She Yüeh enter the room, he said with alacrity: "What's up with your sister?" "Do I know?" answered She Yüeh. "Examine your own self, and you'll readily know." After these words had been heard by Pao-yü, he gazed vacantly for some time, feeling the while very unhappy; but raising himself impetuously: "Well," he exclaimed, "if you don't notice me, all right; I too will go to sleep." And as he spoke he got up, and descending from the couch, he betook himself to his own bed and went to sleep. Hsi Jen, noticing that he had not budged for ever so long, and that he faintly snored, presumed that he must have fallen fast asleep, so she speedily rose to her feet, and taking a wrapper, came over and covered him. But a sound of "hu" reached her ear, as Pao-yü promptly threw it off and once again closed his eyes and feigned sleep. Hsi Jen distinctly grasped his idea, and forthwith nodding her head, she smiled coldly. "You really needn't lose your temper, but from this time forth, I'll become mute and not say one word to you; and what if I do?" Pao-yü could not restrain himself from rising. "What have I been up to again," he asked, "that you're once more at me with your advice? As far as your advice goes, it's all well and good; but just now, without one word of counsel, you paid no heed to me when I came in, but flying into a huff, you went to sleep. Nor could I make out what it was all about, and now here you are again maintaining that I'm angry! But when did I hear you, pray, give me a word of advice of any kind?" "Doesn't your mind yet see for itself?" Hsi Jen replied; "and do you still expect me to tell you?" While they were disputing, dowager lady Chia sent a servant to call him to his repast, and he thereupon crossed over to the front; but after he had hurriedly swallowed a few bowls of rice, he returned to his own apartment, where he discovered Hsi Jen reclining on the outer stove couch, while She Yüeh was playing with the dominoes by her side. Pao-yü had ever been aware of the intimacy which existed between She Yüeh and Hsi Jen, so that paying not the slightest notice to even She Yüeh, he raised the soft portiere, and straightway walked all alone into the inner apartment. She Yüeh felt constrained to follow him in, but Pao-yü at once pushed her out, saying: "I don't venture to disturb you two," so that She Yüeh had no alternative but to leave the room with a smiling countenance, and to bid two young waiting maids go in. Pao-yü took hold of a book and read for a considerable time in a reclining position; but upon raising his head to ask for some tea, he caught sight of a couple of waiting maids standing below, the one of whom, slightly older than the other, was exceedingly winsome. "What's your name?" Pao-yü eagerly inquired. "I'm called Hui Hsiang Orchid Fragrance," that waiting maid rejoined simperingly. "Who gave you this name?" Pao-yü went on to ask. "I went originally under the name of Yuan Xing, gum sandarac," added Hui Xiang, "but Miss Hua it was who changed it. You should really be called Hui Qi, latent fragrance; that would be proper; and why such stuff as Hui Xiang, orchid fragrance? How many sisters have you got?" he further went on to ask of her. "4," replied Hui Xiang. "Which of them are you?" Pao-yü asked. "The fourth," answered Hui Xiang. "By and by you must be called Su Erh, fourth child," Pao-yü suggested; "for there's no need for any such nonsense as Hui Xiang, orchid fragrance, or Lan Qi, epidendrum perfume. Which single girl deserves to be compared to all these flowers, without profaning pretty names and fine surnames?" As he uttered these words, he bade her give him some tea, which he drank, while Hsi Jen and She Yüeh, who were in the outer apartment, had been listening for a long time and laughing with compressed lips. Pao-yü did not on this day so much as put his foot outside the door of his room, but sat all alone sad and dejected, simply taking up his books in order to dispel his melancholy fit, or diverting himself with his writing materials; while he did not even avail himself of the services of any of the family servants, but simply bade Su Erh answer his calls. This Su Erh was, who would have thought it, a girl gifted with matchless artfulness; and perceiving that Pao-yü had requisitioned her services, she speedily began to devise extreme ways and means to inveigle him. When evening came and dinner was over, Pao-yü's eyes were scorching hot and his ears burned from the effects of 2 cups of wine that he had taken. Had it been in past days, he would have now had Hsi Jen and her companions with him, and with all their good cheer and laughter, he would have been enjoying himself. But here was he, on this occasion, dull and forlorn, a solitary being, gazing at the lamp with an absolute lack of pleasure. By and by, he felt a certain wish to go after them, but dreading that if they carried their point, they would, in the future, come and tender advice still more immoderate, and that, were he to put on the airs of a superior to intimidate them, he would appear to be too deeply devoid of all feeling, he therefore, needless to say, thwarted the wish of his heart, and treated them just as if they were dead. And as anyway he was constrained also to live, alone though he was, he readily looked upon them for the time being as departed, and did not worry his mind in the least on their account. On the contrary, he was able to feel happy and contented with his own society. Hence it was that bidding Su Erh trim the candles and brew the tea, he himself perused for a long time the Nan Hua Ching, and upon reaching the precept "On Thieves," given on some additional pages, the burden of which was: "Therefore, by exterminating intuitive wisdom, and by discarding knowledge, highway robbers will cease to exist; and by taking off the jade and by putting away the pearls, pilferers will not spring to existence; by burning the slips and by breaking up the seals, by smashing the measures and snapping the scales, the result will be that the people will not wrangle; by abrogating, to the utmost degree, wise rules under the heavens, people will, at length, be able to take part in deliberation; by putting to confusion the musical scale, and destroying fifes and lutes, by deafening the ears of the blind Kuang, then at last will the human race in the world constrain his sense of hearing; by extinguishing literary compositions, by dispersing the 5 colours, and by sticking the eyes of Li Chu, then, at length, mankind under the whole sky will restrain the perception of his eyes; by destroying and eliminating the hooks and lines, by discarding the compasses and squares, and by amputating Kuang Chüi's fingers, the human race will ultimately succeed in constraining his ingenuity." His high spirits, on perusal of this passage, were so exultant that, taking advantage of the exuberance caused by the wine, he picked up his pen, for he could not repress himself, and continued the text in this wise: "By burning the flower, Hua Hsi Jen, and dispersing the musk, She Yüeh, the consequence will be that the inmates of the inner chambers will, eventually, keep advice to themselves. By obliterating Pao-ch'ai's supernatural beauty, by reducing to ashes Tai-yü's spiritual perception, and by destroying and extinguishing my affectionate preferences, the beautiful in the inner chambers as well as the plain will then, at length, be put on the same footing. And as they will keep the advice to themselves, there will be no fear of any disagreement. By obliterating her supernatural beauty, I shall then have no incentive for any violent affection. By dissolving her spiritual perception, I will have no feelings with which to foster the memory of her talents. The hairpin, jade, flower and musk, Pao-ch'ai, Tai-yü, Hsi-jen and Hsüeh do each and all spread out their snares and dig mines, and thus succeed in inveigling and entrapping every one in the world." At the conclusion of this annex, he flung the pen away and lay himself down to sleep. His head had barely reached the pillow before he at once fell fast asleep, remaining the whole night long perfectly unconscious of everything, straight up to the break of day, when upon waking and turning himself round, he at glance caught sight of no one else than Hsi-jen sleeping in her clothes over the coverlet. Pao-yü had already banished from his mind every thought of what had transpired the previous day, so that forthwith giving Hsi-jen a push, "Get up," he said, "and be careful where you sleep, as you may catch cold." The fact is that Hsi-jen was aware that he was, without regard to day or night, ever up to mischief with his female cousins; but presuming that if she earnestly called him to account, he would not mend his ways, she had for this reason had recourse to tender language to exhort him, in the hope that, in a short while, he would come round again to his better self. But against all her expectations, Pao-yü had, after the lapse of a whole day and night, not changed the least in his manner; and as she really was in her heart quite at a loss what to do, she failed to find throughout the whole night any proper sleep. But when on this day she unexpectedly perceived Pao-yü in this mood, she flattered herself that he had made up his mind to effect a change, and readily thought it best not to notice him. Pao-yü, seeing that she made no reply, forthwith stretched out his hand and undid her jacket; but he had just unclasped the button when his arm was pushed away by Hsi-jen, who again made it fast herself. Pao-yü was so much at his wits' end that he had no alternative but to take her hand and smilingly ask: "What's the matter with you, after all, that I've had to ask you something time after time?" Hsi-jen opened her eyes wide. "There's nothing really the matter with me," she observed, "but as you're awake, you surely had better be going over into the opposite room to comb your hair and wash, for if you dilly-dally any longer, you won't be in time." "Where shall I go over to?" Pao-yü inquired. Hsi-jen gave a sarcastic grin. "Do you ask me?" she rejoined. "Do I know? You're at perfect liberty to go over wherever you like. From this day forth, you and I must part company, so as to avoid fighting like cocks, or brawling like geese, to the amusement of third parties. Indeed, when you've got surfeited on that side, you come over to this, where there are, after all, such girls as fours and fives, Su-erh and Wu-erh, to dance attendance upon you; but such kind of things as ourselves uselessly defile fine names and fine surnames." "Do you still remember this to day?" Pao-yü asked with a smirk. "100 years hence I shall still bear it in mind," Hsi-jen protested. "I'm not like you, who treat my words as so much wind blowing by the side of your ears, that what I've said at night, you've forgotten early in the morning." Pao-yü, perceiving what a seductive though angry air pervaded her face, found it difficult to repress his feelings, and speedily taking up from the side of the pillow a hairpin made of jade, he dashed it down, breaking it in two, exclaiming: "If I again don't listen to your words, may I fare like this hairpin!" Hsi-jen immediately picked up the hairpin, as she remarked: "What's up with you at this early hour of the morning? Whether you listen or not is of no consequence, and is it worth while that you should behave as you do?" "How can you know," Pao-yü answered, "the anguish in my heart?" "Do you also know what anguish means?" Hsi-jen observed laughing. "If you do, then you can judge what the state of my heart is. But be quick and get up, and wash your face and be off." Section 49.